Hi guys, we're going to start our statistics lesson and we're going to start with data gathering techniques. So what you can do if you want, you can follow along in your notebook, you can take some notes, you can obviously have access to this video whenever you need to. If you need to go back and rewatch it when you're working on your homework assignment, okay, that could be useful as well. Okay, so this is just taken right from your book. This is from the Interactive Student Edition, but I just figured since we're not really face-to-face in the classroom, we can follow along together on this video. Okay, so when we're starting to talk about statistics, the question is, under what circumstances should a sample statistic be used as an estimator of a population parameter? So there's a lot of words here that we need to kind of define, all right, what these different words mean. Okay. So when you're talking about finding the mean of samples obtained from various sampling methods, okay, so when you collect data about a population by surveying or studying some or all of the individuals in the population, okay? So when all of the individuals in a population are surveyed or studied, that's called a census. And right now in the country, we're actually in the process of doing a census, which means they need every single person to fill it out and collect the data. So it's not a sample, it's actually collecting all the data from every single person. And then the parameter is the number that summarizes that characteristic. And you get that parameter by doing a census. But that's not realistic because most of the time you can't get information from every single person in the population. So when only some of the individuals in a population are surveyed or studied, that data gathering technique is called sampling. All right. And then the statistic is a number that summarizes the characteristic of that sample. All right. And then statistics are used to estimate parameters. Okay. So when you're taking a poll in an election, all right, the value that you're getting from that poll, you know, if they're 73% of the people are saying they're going to vote, then that's the statistic. And they're using that to estimate the parameter. Okay. The parameter would be that actually 73% of the population is going to vote, but we don't really know that. So statistics are used to approximate parameters. So we want to talk about the different sampling methods, and we're also going to talk about bias as well. Okay, so when you're sampling, you want to get a representative sample, all right, because the statistic obtained from the sample is a good estimator of the population parameter. Okay, so some sampling methods can result in what we call a biased sample, which means that it doesn't represent the actual population. So we want to be able to take a sample that does represent the entire population. All right, so our different type of sampling techniques as we go through. So we're gonna just kind of talk about these, and I'm gonna show you a quick little video that kind of explains the difference between them. And this is what your assignment is gonna be about, okay? Identifying certain sampling methods and determining whether they could be biased or not. So simple random is where each individual in the population has an equal chance of being selected. So you're just trying to randomly select anybody from the population, all right? There's no rhyme or reason to how you're doing it. It's just trying to be as random as possible. Then we have a self-selected sample, which is where you volunteer to be part of it. Right? Then there's a convenience sample, which is based on how accessible you are. Okay, so something like if you were just standing outside of a convenience store and said, I'm just going to sample everybody who comes to this convenience store. All right, obviously that has convenience in the title, but we'll talk a little bit more about that too. A systematic, okay, or when members of a sample are chosen according to a rule, okay, and that rule could be every nth individual in the population. All right. Then we have a stratified sample, which is where you divide the population into groups. Let's say in a high school, you have freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And then individuals from each group are selected through random. So we randomly select a group of freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. So we take a random sample from each group. And then the last one is a cluster. So that's when the population is divided into groups. Some of the groups are randomly selected, but all the individuals in the groups are asked. So this would be something like if we did our freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors, we'd ask all of the freshmen and seniors, all right, to answer our question. Okay, so let's watch a little video and then we'll do an example.
ways of collecting data, and in particular, sampling. And I want to share a bunch of them with you right now. Sometimes one is better than the other, and sometimes some are just not that great at all. So you should watch out for the pitfalls of bad ones. Now, a simple random sample, I think, is always the best one. This is where you randomly select some people from the population or some group from the population, and then survey or sample that group. So I love that. Systematic sampling, these are just little icons to kind of help us remember it. So this is kind of all jumbled up. See the jumbled up thing. Systematic sampling is where you systematically pick a method for generating candidates for a particular thing to be sampled. And so that's why I kind of indicate it like this. So that's a systematic way of sampling. Self-selected sampling is where you actually, have individuals or populations actually volunteer, if you will, or want to participate in a particular survey or sample. I don't like this at all. This is not my favorite one. I think it's a bad one. Cluster sampling is where you divide the collection population up into pieces and then randomly pick pieces and you survey everyone in that piece. Everyone in that piece. Not to be confused with stratify, where you divide the world up into groups and then randomly pick representatives from each group to survey to make sure you get a spread. And then finally, convenience sampling is where you just do something that's easy. Take the bottom, something very, very easy, and it's kind of the lazy way out, but it's certainly a way of sampling. So let's take a look at some examples and see if we can classify which scenario is being illustrated. So here we go. The administrators at a high school want to know if the students are satisfied with the current options for elective courses. They decide to ask a sample of students. Now let's classify each sample. So here's the first group. The administrators choose the first 50 students who arrive at school one morning. Well, that's actually an example of convenience sampling. Convenience sampling because it's just their convenience. They're standing at the door. The first 50 people that first 50 students that walk in, they ask. Well, you see, is that first 50 students, those early risers, those kind of overachieving people maybe, or just what have you, are they really representative of the entire student body? And the answer is not so. So I don't know if I like that or not. Okay, let's look at another one. The administrators choose to survey all of the students in any two of the 4 grades. Now, this is an example of cluster sampling, where they survey all the people in 2 of the grades. And so that's a way of collecting data that's kind of spread out a little bit more. And then here's the final attempt. The administrators choose to survey every 10th student entering an all-school assembly. Now, how do you enter an all-school assembly? It's kind of at random. And so looking at every 10th student seems to be, quite frankly, an example of a systematic method where you've defined a particular method and you're using it to generate your groups of people. And that's a reasonable way of collecting data. So there you can kind of see 3 illustrations of 3 of the different types of sampling methods that are actually out there. Very, very cool. Some sampling methods are better than others. It is not the case that all sampling methods are equal.
Okay, so now that we just saw that little video to give us an idea of what's going on, let's answer some questions on our own. Okay, so here's one. Here's a question. It says, administrators at your school want to know if more vegetarian items should be added to the lunch menu. The administrators survey every 20th student who enters the cafeteria during the lunch period. Okay, so this would be a systematic sample, okay, because every nth student is being used. So this is one of our ones where we have a given rule, okay? So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at this question, and this is how the homework is going to be set up because it's going to be set up from my HRW account. So here we have our example. So it says identify the population, classify the sampling methods, and decide whether the sampling methods could result in a biased sample. And then complete the explanation of your reasoning. So let's start with this. So it says a local newspaper conducts a survey to find out if adult residents of the city think the use of handheld cell phones while driving in the city should be banned. All right. So for part A, the newspaper sends a text message to a random selection of 1,000 subscribers whose cell phones are listed in the paper subscription database. All right. So the population consists of, so we want to figure out what population are we trying to model. So we want to go back into the problem, and they want to find out if adult residents of the city think something. So right there, there's your population. Okay, adult residents of the city. So we have a drop-down menu, and we go to adult residents of the city, and that would be our selection. In a blank sample of subscribers with cell phones, everyone has an equally likely chance of being chosen. So this one, we have to pick what type of sample is being placed here. So since it said sends a text message to a random selection of 1,000 subscribers. Okay, so that's just randomly, and we're taking a sample of subscribers with cell phones, and it says random, so that would be our simple random. And those subscribers have an equally likely chance of being chosen. However, we want to figure out if the survey is biased or not. Okay, well, since we're only asking people who have cell phones, that's likely to be biased because people without cell phones are being left out of the survey. All right, and they may have a different opinion about this specific survey. All right. If you have a cell phone, then you might be less likely to want them to be banned than opposed if you don't have one, or if you haven't even listed it. So now let's look at B. It says, using the 10 neighborhoods in which the city is divided, the newspaper randomly contacts 100 adults living in each of the neighborhoods. So we're grouping. So this is almost like cluster, but it's not going to be a cluster because we're not contacting everybody in a neighborhood. We're just contacting 100 adults in each neighborhood. So that would be our stratified because we're breaking them up into groups, but we're only taking a random sample in each group. And since we're doing random of just anybody living in the neighborhood, doesn't matter whether they have a cell phone or not, that is not likely to result in a bias. All right. And then once our answers are all chosen, we can hit our check answer. And we have that we're correct. Okay, so for your homework assignment, it's posted on my.hrw.com. There's a link under Google Classroom for you to follow. Okay, most of the examples are like this, identifying certain samples or identifying if there's going to be a bias or not. So make sure that you click turn it in at the end. If you need to reset your password for any reason, if you forgot, then I can do that for you. Remember that your username should be your Milton email address. Okay, and then if you need me to reset your password, just shoot me an email and I will reset it and send you that code. Okay, that homework assignment's going to be due on Tuesday. All right, so you guys will hear back from me on Tuesday. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and you can watch this video as many times as you like.